The big night had finally arrived. For years, she had practiced in small, empty rooms, dreaming of a moment like this. Now, standing just behind the heavy velvet curtains of the grand concert hall, she could hardly breathe. The air smelled of old wood and dust, mixed with the faint scent of expensive perfume from the audience outside. She held her instrument close to her chest, feeling the cold wood against her skin. It was an old cello, borrowed from the university, but it felt like the most expensive thing in the world to her. She could hear the murmur of hundreds of people talking on the other side of the curtain. It sounded like the ocean waves, constant and heavy. Her heart was beating so hard that she could feel it thumping against her ribs. She closed her eyes for a second and tried to remember. The advice her teacher had given her: don't think about the notes. Think about the story. But right now, the only story in her head was the fear of messing up. This was the biggest competition of her life. The judges were sitting in the front row, looking stern and serious. One wrong move and years of hard work could disappear in a second. A man in a black suit walked up to her. It was the stage manager. He looked at his clipboard, then up at her. "You are on in 2 minutes," he whispered. "Just go out there and play like you do in the practice room?" She nodded, but she couldn't find her voice to speak. Her mouth felt dry, like she had been eating sand. She looked down at her hands. They were shaking just a little bit. She quickly made a fist and then opened them again, trying to shake off the nerves. She thought about all the mornings she woke up at 5 a.m. to practice before school. She thought about the blisters on her fingers that had turned into hard calluses. She thought about the sacrifice. It all came down to the next 10 minutes. The lights in the hall dimmed. The murmuring of the crowd stopped instantly. A silence fell over the room that was louder than any noise she had ever heard. It was the silence of expectation. Every single person in that room was waiting for her. They were waiting to be impressed, or maybe they were waiting for her to fail. She didn't know which was worse. The stage manager gave her a small nod. "Good luck," he mouthed. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with air, and stepped out from the darkness of the wings. The spotlight hit her like a physical blow. It was so bright that she couldn't see the audience at all. She couldn't see the judges or the critics or her family sitting in the third row. All she could see was a wall of blinding white light. She walked to the single chair in the center of the stage and sat down. The cello rested between her knees, familiar and grounding. She looked out into the darkness, but it was useless. She felt completely alone up there, floating in a sea of light. The silence stretched on, heavy and uncomfortable. She could hear a clock ticking somewhere in the distance, or maybe it was just the beating of her own heart in her ears. This was it. There was no turning back. She lifted the bow, tightening the hair one last time. She felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. It was a cruel kind of pressure, knowing that so much depended on so little. But as she raised the bow to the strings, she felt a sudden rush of adrenaline. She wasn't just a student anymore. She was a musician, and she was ready to play. The first note hung in the air, perfect and clear. She felt a wave of relief wash over her as her fingers found the strings on their own. The muscle memory she had built up over thousands of hours was taking over. For a moment, she forgot about the lights, the crowd, and the fear. She was just a girl playing her instrument, telling a story through music. The melody was sad and slow, as she poured her own feelings into it, letting the cello sing for her. She closed her eyes, letting the sound vibrate through her body, feeling the connection between the wood and her soul. Then, without warning, the atmosphere changed completely. It started as a small pop, like a firecracker going off in the distance. Before she could even process what it was happening, a screeching sound tore through the quiet hall. It was a horrible, high-pitched noise that felt like a knife cutting through the music. The sound system, usually so quiet and hidden, had suddenly come alive with a deafening screech of feedback. The reaction was instant. The audience gasped, a collective sound of shock that rippled through the rows of seats. Hundreds of people flinched, some covering their ears with their hands. The beautiful, magical moment was shattered in a split second. The judges in the front row grabbed their papers as the wind from the speakers blew them around. It was chaotic and loud, the complete opposite of the peaceful melody she had been playing. The shock of the noise hit her like a physical force. Her body jerked in surprise. Her hands, which had been so calm and steady just a second ago, suddenly spasmed. In that moment of blind panic, her grip on the bow failed. It felt like everything was moving in slow motion. She saw the bow slip out of her fingers. It tumbled through the air, hitting the edge of the cello with a dull clunk, and then clattered loudly onto the wooden floor. It didn't just fall. It skidded. It slid away from her, spinning dangerously close to the edge of the stage. If it went off the edge, it would fall onto the concrete floor below. The noise of the feedback stopped abruptly, cut off by a sound technician, but the damage was done. The silence that returned to the hall was different now. It wasn't a silence of anticipation. It was a heavy, suffocating silence of embarrassment. She froze. Her hands were still hovering in the air, frozen in the shape of holding the bow, but there was nothing there. Her eyes went wide, staring at the empty space in her hand and then down at the bow lying on the floor. It looked so small and lonely down there on the vast stage. Her face felt incredibly hot. A deep red flush of humiliation started at her neck and rushed all the way up to her hairline. She could feel the eyes of every single person in the room burning into her. It felt like 1,000 spotlights were focused directly on her mistake. In her head, she could hear the thoughts she imagined they were thinking. She ruined it. She can't even hold on to her bow. It's over. The shame was overwhelming. It wrapped around her chest, making it hard to breathe. She wanted to disappear. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. This wasn't just a mistake. It felt like a public humiliation. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The conductor on the side of the stage looked unsure, his baton hovering in the air. The soundman was probably panicking in the back. But in the center of the stage, she sat paralyzed. The enormity of the crash was weighing down on her. All the hard work, the mornings, the sacrifice, it felt like it was all ruined by one slip of the fingers. The cruel reality of live performance had hit her hard. There are no second chances in real life, or so she thought in that dark moment. She felt small and foolish, exposed in front of strangers who had paid to see perfection. Not a clumsy girl who dropped her bow. For what felt like an eternity, the world stood completely still. The heavy silence that filled the hall was deafening, pressing against her ears like a physical weight. It was the kind of quiet that feels loud, where you can hear your own blood rushing and the thumping of your heart against your ribs. Up on the stage, under the blinding white lights, she felt like a statue made of stone. She couldn't move. Her breath was caught in her throat, sharp and ragged. Her eyes remained locked on the bow lying on the floor. It was just a few feet away, but it might as well have been miles. The cool air of the concert hall suddenly felt freezing. A cold sweat broke out across her forehead, making her skin feel clammy and cold. Her hands, usually so warm and flexible, felt like ice blocks. She stared at them, the fingers that had practiced scales for 10,000 hours, now trembling uncontrollably in the air. They looked alien to her, weak and useless. The doubt began to creep in, slow and poisonous, whispering nasty things in the back of her mind. It told her that this was it. This was the moment everyone would remember. Not the beautiful music she tried to make, but the clumsy, awkward girl who dropped her bow in the middle of the most important show of her life. Down in the audience, the mood had shifted. The magical spell of the evening was completely broken. People began to shuffle in their seats. The sound of fabric rustling and feet shifting on the floor seemed incredibly loud. She could hear low murmurs rippling through the crowd, like wind through dry leaves. She couldn't make out exactly what they were saying, but her imagination filled in the gaps. She imagined them laughing. She imagined them pointing fingers. She imagined the judges in the front row shaking their heads, scratching a dark line through her name on their clipboards. She saw one man in the front row lift his wrist and check his watch, sighing loudly. He looked bored and annoyed. That small gesture hurt more than anything else. It was a clear sign that he didn't care about her panic or her fear. He just wanted the entertainment, or he wanted to leave. Another person leaned over to whisper something to their neighbor, and they both glanced up at the stage. Were they sympathizing? Or were they mocking her? To her terrified mind, it felt like mockery. She felt exposed, raw and vulnerable, like an animal caught in a trap with nowhere to run. The urge to flee was overwhelming. Every instinct in her body was screaming at her to stand up, run off the stage, and hide in the safety of the dark wings. She wanted to run all the way home, crawl under her bed, and never come out. The tears were stinging the corners of her eyes, hot and salty. She had to blink rapidly to keep them from falling. If she cried now, it would be a total disaster. She would be a failure and a crybaby. The shame was a heavy blanket that suffocated her, making her shoulders slump forward. She looked over at the conductor standing on his podium. He looked confused and helpless. He didn't know what to do either. Should he stop the music? Should he send someone to help her? He was frozen, just like she was, waiting for a cue that wasn't coming. This wasn't part of the plan. There was no script for this kind of humiliation. In a professional setting, everyone expected perfection. They expected a machine-like performance. And she had just broken. A dark thought crossed her mind. Maybe she wasn't good enough. Maybe this was the universe telling her that she didn't belong on this stage. All those years of sacrifice, missing parties, missing family holidays, spending every penny on lessons, was it all for nothing? The pressure on her chest was crushing. It felt like she was underwater, drowning in her own anxiety. The spotlight above her seemed to grow hotter and brighter, exposing every flaw, every sweat drop, every tremor. Time seemed to stretch out, making seconds feel like minutes. She was still sitting there, doing nothing, looking like a fool. The audience was getting restless. The magic was gone, replaced by a tense, awkward atmosphere. She could feel the energy draining out of the room. People were losing interest. They were losing respect. The cruelty of the moment wasn't just that she had dropped the bow. It was that she was letting them watch her fall apart. She was letting them see her fear. She felt a wave of nausea roll through her stomach. She gripped the neck of the cello until her knuckles turned white. The rough wood dug into her palm, the only real thing in a world that felt like it was spinning out of control. She was trapped in a nightmare where the only escape was to wake up, but she was wide awake. This was the lowest point she had ever felt. It was a lonely, terrifying place to be, surrounded by hundreds of people but feeling entirely alone. The silence was no longer just quiet. It was heavy with judgment, crushing her spirit under the weight of expectation and disappointment. Just as the weight of the silence was about to crush her completely, a small sound broke the heavy tension. It came from the back of the hall, far away from the judges and the critics. It was the sound of two hands clapping together. At first, it was steady and slow, clap, clap, clap. It wasn't the sound of someone being polite at the end of a song. It was different. It had a rhythm to it, strong and steady. It was the sound of encouragement. She froze, her breath still caught in her throat, wondering what was happening. Was someone making fun of her? Was this a cruel joke? But then a second person joined in from the balcony. Then a third near the front. Within just a few seconds, the scattered clapping grew into a wave. It wasn't a standing ovation for a perfect performance yet. It was a message. The audience wasn't clapping because she had played perfectly. They were clapping because they were human. They were telling her that they understood. They were saying, "It's okay. We know you are scared. We are with you." The sound washed over her, pushing back the heavy, suffocating fear that had gripped her chest. The murmurs of impatience were gone, replaced by this steady, beating rhythm of support. It wasn't the wild cheering of a victory, but the warm, solid comfort of empathy. She realized then that they didn't want her to run away. They didn't want her to hide. They wanted her to continue. They were waiting for her to pick herself up, literally and figuratively. Hearing that sound, something shifted inside her brain. The panic was still there, bubbling in her stomach, but it was no longer in control. A new feeling took its place, a spark of anger mixed with determination. She realized that the performance wasn't about being a robot who never makes mistakes. It was about being human and connecting with people. The mistake had happened. It was an awkward, ugly fact. But she couldn't change it. She could only choose what happened next. She could choose to let this moment destroy her, or she could choose to use it. She looked at the bow lying on the stage floor. It was no longer a symbol of her failure. It was just a tool. It was a piece of wood and horsehair that had slipped, nothing more. She didn't need to be ashamed of it. She just needed to pick it up. Her hands, which had been trembling violently, slowly began to steady. The cold feeling in her fingers started to fade, replaced by a rush of blood that made them feel warm and alive again. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs all the way to the bottom, and let it out slowly. She unclenched her jaw, realizing she had been grinding her teeth together. She relaxed her shoulders, dropping them an inch. This was the moment of choice. No more hiding. Without standing up, she leaned forward gracefully toward the floor. The movement wasn't frantic or panicked anymore. It was calm and slow. The bright lights caught the dust motes dancing around her as she reached out. Her fingers wrapped around the stick of the bow. The moment she touched it, she felt a reconnect with her instrument. She lifted it up, checking it quickly to make sure it wasn't broken. It was fine. It was just a bow. She sat back up straight on her chair. She looked out into the darkness, but this time she didn't see a wall of judgment. She felt the energy of the crowd supporting her. She gave them a small, almost invisible nod. It was a promise. She wasn't going to play the song safe anymore. She wasn't going to try to be perfect. She was going to play with passion. She was going to play for the people who had clapped for her when she had fallen, the conductor. Seeing her sit up straight and seeing the change in her posture relaxed his shoulders too. He gave her a look that asked, "Are you ready?" She didn't say a word. She just lifted the bow to the strings and raised her eyes to meet his. The message was clear. Let's start again. The audience grew quiet again, the clapping fading away. But this time the silence wasn't heavy or scary. It was expectant. It was the silence of people holding their breath, waiting to see if she could turn this disaster into something beautiful. And for the first time that night, she believed she could. She didn't start the piece from the very beginning. Instead, she jumped right back into the melody where the disaster had interrupted her. She lifted her bow and brought it down on the strings with a force that surprised everyone in the room, even herself. The sound that came out wasn't the gentle, careful tone of a student afraid of making a mistake. It was a deep, growling roar that sounded like a cry of defiance. It was raw and it was loud. The change in the atmosphere was instant. The audience, which had been holding its breath in awkwardness, suddenly leaned forward. They could feel the difference. She wasn't playing the notes technically anymore. She was attacking them with a newfound passion. Every stroke of the bow was filled with the emotion she had felt just moments ago, the embarrassment, the fear, and now the relief. She poured all of that human mezzanines into the music. Because she had already fallen, she had nothing left to lose. That total lack of fear made her playing incredibly powerful. Her fingers danced across the fingerboard, moving with a speed and aggression she had never managed in practice. Usually she was worried about hitting the right pitch perfectly. But now she was focused on the feeling. She let the music be rough around the edges. She let it breathe. The cello seemed to come alive in her hands, vibrating against her chest like a second heart. The melody was no longer just a pretty tune. It was a story of survival. It was the sound of someone getting up after being knocked down. The conductor, sensing this shift, stopped watching the sheet music so closely. He started watching her. He followed her lead, urging the orchestra to match her intensity. The music swelled and crashed like ocean waves. It was dramatic and cinematic. The people in the front row forgot about their watches. The critics forgot about their clipboards. Everyone was transfixed. They weren't just listening to a concert. They were witnessing a battle. They were seeing a young girl turn a moment of total humiliation into an act of bravery. As the piece moved toward its climax, the lights seemed to shine even brighter, but she didn't mind them anymore. She welcomed them. She closed her eyes and let the music take her completely away. She was sweating, her hair sticking to her forehead, but she didn't care. She felt free. The cruel moment that had tried to ruin her was actually the thing that made her performance beautiful. If the sound system hadn't screeched, she would have played a safe, perfect, boring song. But because of the mistake, she was playing something real. The final notes of the concerto are usually slow and fading away, a soft whisper at the end. But she decided to change it. She played the last chords with a sustained, ringing strength that hung in the air long after she stopped moving her bow. She sat there, chest heaving, hands still gripping the instrument, letting the final sound echo off the high ceilings of the hall. For 2 seconds, there was absolute silence. It was the kind of silence that happens when something profound has just occurred. No one moved. No one breathed. Then, all at once, the spell broke. It wasn't just polite applause. It was an explosion. The entire concert hall erupted. People jumped to their feet in a single motion. The cheering was so loud it vibrated the floorboards. She looked out into the crowd, her vision blurry with tears that were finally falling. But this time, they weren't tears of shame. They were tears of joy and relief. She saw the judges clapping with genuine smiles. She saw the man who had checked his watch earlier now clapping the loudest, a look of admiration on his face. The bowed head and the humbled spirit had won them over. She stood up slowly, her legs feeling a little shaky. She bowed deeply, not just once, but 3 times. With every bow, the noise got louder. She wasn't just bowing to the audience. She was thanking them for sticking with her. She was accepting the fact that she wasn't perfect, and that was okay. As she walked off the stage, leaving the harsh lights behind, she felt a lightness in her step that she had never felt before. The night had started with a cruel, ugly moment, but she had turned it into a beautiful performance that no one would ever forget. She walked into the wings, hugging her cello, knowing she had survived the worst and come out stronger.